Project Financing in the Terran Republic, a collection of tales. The Terran Republic was a vast and bureaucratic entity, stretching across dozens of star systems, each with its own ambitions, struggles, and financial challenges. While the Republic's navy and political intrigues captured the headlines, another war was waged in the shadows, one of funding, deals, and desperate gambits to finance grand projects. The case of the Asteroid Belt Mining Initiative. Captain Leora Mendez was not a banker. She was a miner, a veteran of deep space operations, and a woman with a vision. The Asteroid Belt Mining Initiative, ABMI, could revolutionize industry across the Republic, providing rare minerals without the environmental destruction that planetary mining caused. The problem? Mining ships weren't cheap, and neither were orbital refineries. She pitched her project to the Terran Development Bank, but the financiers saw nothing but risk. Your projected yield estimates are optimistic, one of the investment officers, a man named Hadrian Sue, remarked, and your collateral is speculative at best. Speculative? Leora scoffed. The entire Republic runs on speculation. You financed the Epsilon Gateway project, and they haven't even finished stabilizing the wormhole. Hadrian sighed. That project had political backing. That was the crux of it. Leora had the tech, the expertise, even a fleet of miners ready to work, but without the right political allies, the Republic's financiers weren't willing to take the plunge. It was then she realized she needed more than a business plan, she needed leverage. A week later, Leora sat across from Senator Adrian Voss, the ranking member of the Republic's Trade Commission. She laid out her vision, but what sealed the deal was a simple data chip. This contains preliminary scans of asteroid field PX991, she said. It's rich in transuranic elements, the kind your committee has been struggling to source since the Callisto mines dried up. Senator Voss smiled. 3 weeks later, the Terran Development Bank approved a multi-billion credit financing package for ABMI. The secret to project financing in the Terran Republic, Leora had learned, wasn't just numbers, it was knowing who needed a win. The terraforming fiasco on Epsilon Prime. Not every financing story ended in triumph. Take the case of Epsilon Prime, a promising exoplanet on the Republic's frontier. A consortium of corporate and governmental interests sought to terraform the planet into a lush paradise, drawing trillions in investment. The initial projections were solid, with enough hydroengineering, atmospheric processing, and genetic seeding. Epsilon Prime could support a population of 5 billion within a century. Investors poured money into the project, certain of their returns. Then the atmospheric processors malfunctioned. The planet's delicate balance shifted, unleashing acidic storms that corroded the very structures meant to support life. Emergency bailout talks dominated the Republic's financial circles. Some factions demanded a liquidation of assets, essentially abandoning the project and cutting losses. Others, particularly those who had bet their political careers on Epsilon Prime, pushed for additional funding. In the end, the Republic did what it always did, it doubled down. More financing was secured, more credits were printed, and a new generation of engineers were brought in to fix the mess. The planet remained an unstable, dangerous investment, but the money never stopped flowing. The lesson? In the Terran Republic, some projects were simply too big to fail. The privateer's gambit. While official projects sought public or corporate financing, there were those who worked outside the system. Captain Renard Vale was one such individual, a former naval officer turned privateer. He specialized in acquiring high-value assets for clients who preferred not to go through legal channels. When a rogue colony on the fringes of Republic space needed infrastructure but lacked creditworthiness, they turned to Vale. His solution was unconventional. He raided decommissioned Republic storage yards, liberating atmospheric scrubbers and hydroponic modules that had been sitting unused for years. With a few forged documents and a bit of bribery, the colony got its supplies at a fraction of the cost. Of course, Vale didn't do this out of charity. His fee? A 5% stake in the colony's future profits, backed by a legally dubious contract that would be impossible to enforce in Republic courts. But in the lawless frontier, a man with armed ships and useful connections didn't need courts. Conclusion: the real currency of the Republic. Money was important in the Terran Republic, but it was rarely the deciding factor. Influence, timing, and a willingness to bend the rules mattered just as much. From asteroid mining to planetary terraforming to under-the-table deals, financing a project required more than just a solid business plan, it required an understanding of how the game was played. And in the Republic, the game never stopped. The Terran Republic prided itself on being the economic heart of the galaxy. Officially, every major development project had to be sanctioned by the Republic's financial authorities. Unofficially, if you had the credits and the right connections, there were always other ways to secure funding. Enter the Hyperlane Syndicate. When Governor Elias Torren of the Far Reaches Colony wanted to build a new hyperlane relay station, he hit a wall. The Republic's financial regulators refused to approve the loan. The risk was too high, they claimed, and the colony's output didn't justify the expense. But Torren knew the truth. The big shipping conglomerates controlled the hyperlanes. They didn't want new routes, especially ones outside their control. If the colony secured its own relay, it would cut down on transport fees and disrupt the existing monopoly. So, Torren turned to the syndicate. The Hyperlane Syndicate wasn't a bank. It was an informal network of rogue traders, ex-financiers, and independent lenders who operated outside the Republic's oversight. They funded projects the Republic wouldn't touch for a price. Torren secured his financing, but the terms were steep. The syndicate demanded a 20% stake in all future trade revenue from the relay. Failure to meet payments wouldn't just mean legal troubles, it meant syndicate enforcers paying an unpleasant visit. Despite the risks, Torren accepted. A year later, the relay station was operational, and the Far Reaches colony was booming. The Republic took notice, but by then, it was too late. The colony had grown powerful enough to demand official recognition, forcing the Republic to integrate it into the system. The syndicate? They walked away with a permanent revenue stream, proving once again that in the Terran Republic, there was always another way to get things done. The AI investment scandal. The promise of artificial intelligence had long tempted financiers across the Republic. Automated markets, predictive analytics, and even AI-driven project management were the future, or so they were told. Then came the Synertech scandal. Synertech Systems was a rising star in the financial sector, claiming its AI models could predict economic shifts with near-perfect accuracy. Investors flocked to the company, pouring billions into its development. The problem? The AI wasn't as advanced as advertised. Behind the scenes, Synertech's executives manipulated data to make their AI seem infallible. They used insider information to predict market crashes that they had engineered themselves. When independent auditors were finally allowed access to the system, they found most of Synertech's AI-generated investment strategies had been crafted by human analysts using outdated algorithms. The fallout was catastrophic. Synertech collapsed overnight, wiping out entire investment funds. The Republic's regulators scrambled to contain the damage. But the scandal had already exposed a deeper truth. No one really understood how much of the Republic's financial system was built on blind faith. In the aftermath, AI-driven financing became a regulatory nightmare. But as history had proven time and time again, rules in the Republic existed to be bent. And somewhere, in a darkened boardroom, another revolutionary AI startup was already preparing its pitch. The shadow markets of Mars. Mars had always been a financial hub of the Republic. The megacities of Olympus Mons and Valles Marineris housed the Republic's largest banks, investment firms, and corporate headquarters. But beneath the glimmering towers, a hidden economy thrived, the shadow markets. Not every project could secure official financing. Some were too risky, too controversial, or simply too illegal. That's where the shadow markets came in. There were whispers of classified military projects, entire fleets constructed off the books through secret funding networks, underground biotech labs, where rogue scientists developed genetic modifications banned by the Republic, even experimental terraforming projects, testing extreme climate manipulation on abandoned moons. The funding for these projects didn't come from traditional investors. Instead, it flowed through encrypted credit chains, anonymous financiers, and backdoor deals brokered in the smoky lounges of Mars' underground elite. And the best part? The Republic's own officials were often the biggest players in the game. It was an open secret that senators, military leaders, and corporate executives funneled their personal wealth into the shadow markets, funding ventures they could never publicly acknowledge. If a project succeeded, they reaped the rewards. If it failed, it never officially existed. The Republic thrived on order, but beneath its carefully crafted facade, chaos was where the real power played. The future of finance in the Republic. For every success story in the Republic's project financing history, there were a dozen failures, scandals, and outright criminal enterprises, but the game never stopped. New colonies needed infrastructure, Warships needed funding. Entire planets required economic overhauls. The money had to come from somewhere, and whether it was through official banks, rogue syndicates, or hidden markets, someone was always willing to make a deal. Because in the Terran Republic, the only thing more valuable than money was knowing how to use it. War had always been good for business. When the Terran Republic found itself locked in a brutal conflict with the Orion Dominion, credits flowed like water. The Republic's fleets needed ships, soldiers needed weapons, and entire planets had to be fortified. But war was expensive, and even the Republic's vast financial reserves weren't limitless. Enter the War Bonds Initiative. Republic economists devised a bold strategy: sell bonds to the public, promising high returns once victory was secured. Citizens across the Republic, from wealthy investors to factory workers, poured their savings into the war effort, convinced they were backing a guaranteed triumph. At first, it worked. The influx of capital allowed the Republic to outproduce the Dominion, fielding wave after wave of new warships and mechanized battalions. The tide turned. Victory seemed inevitable. But then, the war dragged on. What was supposed to be a 2-year campaign stretched into a decade-long quagmire. The Republic's economy teetered on the brink as war bond payouts loomed. The government faced a grim choice: admit financial ruin or find a way to delay the reckoning. Their solution? A new war. Documents leaked years after the war ended revealed that Republic strategists deliberately provoked conflicts with breakaway colonies and pirate factions to justify continued military spending. Every new engagement meant fresh war bond sales, keeping the system afloat. By the time the Republic officially declared victory over the Orion Dominion, the original bondholders had waited nearly 20 years for repayment. Many had died, their fortunes lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. The Republic quietly inflated its currency to devalue bond payouts, ensuring it could meet its obligations without collapsing. The lesson was clear: victory wasn't just won on the battlefield, it was bought and paid for in boardrooms. The Lunar Cartel and the Great Banking Coup. The Republic's financial institutions prided themselves on stability, but behind the polished facade, a quiet war was fought among the megabanks, each vying for control over the Republic's trillion credit economy. And at the heart of it all was the Lunar Cartel. The Lunar Cartel wasn't an official entity, it was an alliance of the 5 most powerful banking houses, controlling everything from trade loans to planetary development funds. Individually, these banks were powerful. Together, they were untouchable. But not everyone wanted to play by their rules. When Helios Financial, a rising challenger bank, threatened to disrupt the cartel's monopoly with decentralized, AI-driven finance models, the cartel struck back. Regulatory agencies, bought and paid for by cartel interests, suddenly discovered compliance violations in Helios accounts. Lawsuits appeared overnight, draining the company's liquidity. A mysterious cyber attack erased critical financial records, sending Helios stock into freefall. Within months, the once promising upstart was forced into liquidation, its assets quietly absorbed by the very banks that had orchestrated its downfall. It was a textbook example of the Republic's unwritten rule: innovation was welcome so long as it didn't threaten the existing order. The black budget projects, financing the unthinkable. Officially, every credit in the Republic's budget was accounted for. Unofficially, trillions vanished into classified expenditures every fiscal cycle, funding projects the public would never know about. The black budget was more than just a financial loophole, it was an entire shadow economy. Some of these projects were whispered about in conspiracy circles. Project Umbra, a rumored deep space weapons platform, capable of planetary-scale destruction. No official record existed, but procurement logs showed massive shipments of exotic materials to an uncharted sector. The Ghost Fleet, an armada of stealth warships, allegedly built without Senate approval. Their existence was only hinted at when a Dominion warship mysteriously vanished without a trace. The Lazarus Initiative, a bioengineering program dedicated to human longevity, funded through off-the-books medical trials conducted in abandoned research stations. Where did the money come from? Some of it was skimmed from official military budgets, buried under vague descriptions like operational contingencies. Other funds came from secret investments in Republic-controlled corporations, ensuring a steady revenue stream without public scrutiny. And then there were the more extreme measures: entire star systems designated as quarantine zones, their resources stripped under the guise of environmental containment. If anyone asked, the official reports always pointed to a viral outbreak or a failed terraforming attempt. The Republic's citizens believed they lived in a system governed by law and order. The truth was far stranger: their government was financing a future they weren't even allowed to imagine. The final gamble, the Republic's greatest secret. For centuries, the Terran Republic had maintained its dominance through a delicate balance of financial manipulation, political maneuvering, and sheer military might. But deep within the archives of the Central Treasury, a hidden file contained a truth that could unravel it all. The Republic was bankrupt. The vast wealth that funded its fleets, its colonies, and its ambitious megaprojects, it was an illusion. The Republic had spent beyond its means for generations, borrowing from future revenues that would never materialize. Every project, every war, every financial crisis had been patched over with more debt, rolled into the next century like a game of interstellar shell corporations. A handful of officials knew the truth. Their solution? Keep the cycle going indefinitely, expand to new systems, extract resources, issue more bonds, and hope that no one ever asked to see the real books. Because if they did, the Republic would collapse overnight. And so, the greatest financial trick in history continued, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy, misinformation, and carefully controlled economic forecasts. Because in the Terran Republic, the most valuable currency wasn't credits. It was belief. The Terran Republic had long mastered the art of financial expansion. For centuries, it issued loans to developing colonies, investing in infrastructure, spaceports, and planetary defense grids, all under the guise of fostering economic growth. But what most citizens didn't realize was that these loans were never meant to be repaid. It started innocently enough. A fledgling colony would petition the Republic for funding to build its first dome cities, import agricultural biomes, or construct orbital trade hubs. The Republic, through its vast network of banks and development funds, happily provided the credits. The problem? The repayment terms were impossible. Interest rates were carefully calculated so that, by the time the first payments were due, the colony would already be in deficit. Then came the bailout offers, more loans, more financial entanglements, always in exchange for greater control. Within a generation, entire planets were functionally owned by the Republic's financial institutions. When the colony of Aurora Prime attempted to resist, declaring economic independence and refusing to honor its debts, the Republic responded swiftly. First, they cut off trade routes. No shipments of medical supplies, no food imports, no critical machine parts. Then came the asset seizures. Any company or investor with ties to Aurora Prime had their accounts frozen overnight. Within weeks, the colony's economy crumbled. Its leaders were forced to surrender, signing over planetary governance to a Republic-appointed administrator. The lesson was clear: in the Republic, sovereignty was an illusion. The real rulers sat behind desks, controlling not armies, but balance sheets. The Red Ledger assassinations, when debts turned deadly. Not all financial disputes could be settled through diplomacy. In the underbelly of the Republic's financial world, there was a phrase whispered in hushed tones: the Red Ledger. The Red Ledger wasn't an official institution. It was a system of enforcement used by the Republic's most powerful financial entities when debts couldn't be repaid or when individuals posed a threat to the economic order. Some debtors simply disappeared. A CEO who defaulted on a multi-trillion credit defense contract suffered a tragic shuttle malfunction. A rogue financier who attempted to expose Republic accounting fraud was found floating in deep space, his suit's oxygen mysteriously vented. Others were forced into servitude, their assets stripped, their lives destroyed. The Republic had no formal debtors' prisons, but entire mining colonies were filled with people who had once worn fine suits, now toiling away in eternal repayment. One man, a former Treasury Minister named Julian Kale, came too close to unraveling the Red Ledger's network. He attempted to go public with evidence of extrajudicial killings, only to find himself trapped in a web of false charges. Within a month, he had been convicted of financial terrorism. His punishment? Life imprisonment in a deep space penal station that didn't officially exist. The Republic didn't need assassins when it could erase people with paperwork. The galactic stock market crash, the day the Republic stood still. For centuries, the Republic's stock markets had been seen as untouchable, sprawling financial ecosystems spanning entire sectors, with megacorporations, colonial governments, and private investors all trading in a never-ending cycle of profit. Then came the great galactic flash crash. No one saw it coming. One morning, as the markets opened on Mars, An algorithmic trading glitch sent the entire system into freefall. Billions of trades executed in microseconds, selling off assets at absurdly low prices, triggering automatic sell-offs across the Republic. Within minutes, trillions of credits vanished, major corporations collapsed, colonies reliant on Republic-backed investment funds saw their financial backing disintegrate. Panic spread as reports flooded in, entire pension systems were wiped out, trade routes ground to a halt, and central banks struggled to restore order. By the time regulators intervened, it was too late. The financial elite had already extracted their wealth, having been tipped off by insider connections. Ordinary citizens, however, were left ruined. The government promised reforms, investigations, accountability, but behind the scenes, the same financial titans who had profited from the crash were now positioning themselves to rebuild the system in their favor. The Republic had survived, but for its people, the illusion of financial security had been shattered forever. The Genesis Project, the Republic's most expensive secret. Deep in the classified financial records of the Republic's treasury, there was one project that eclipsed all others in cost, secrecy, and ambition. It was known only as Genesis. The project had no official description, no public disclosures. The funding, trillions of credits, was buried under layers of black budget accounting, hidden within vague military expenditures and classified research grants. Rumors swirled. Some claimed Genesis was an experiment in artificial planetary creation, a last-ditch effort to develop new worlds as the Republic's expansion reached its limits. Others whispered that it was a time dilation colony, a hidden world where the Republic's elite could escape the consequences of their own economic collapse, waiting out centuries in isolated safety. But the most disturbing theory? Genesis wasn't about creating new worlds. It was about controlling the ones that already existed. A rogue financial analyst, before vanishing under mysterious circumstances, leaked fragments of classified reports suggesting that Genesis was an experiment in total economic warfare. The Republic wasn't just manipulating planetary economies, it was simulating entire civilizations. Massive AI-driven economic models ran in secret, predicting the rise and fall of planetary markets, testing financial collapse scenarios, and even orchestrating artificial recessions to consolidate power. If true, it meant that every financial crisis, every debt collapse, every market crash wasn't an accident, it was a calculated move in a larger game. And worst of all? Genesis was still running,